Hello, welcome to the USAID UNDP Global Big Cat Dialogues. My name is Mark Fowler. I am the Nature Initiative Director at Grace Farms Foundation here in New Canaan, Connecticut. And I'm very excited to moderate these Global Big Cat Dialogues because I've been a spokesperson for the natural world for most of my life, representing wildlife and nature. And also because at Grace Farms Foundation, I work very closely with my colleagues, Rod Katabi and Sharon Prince, to combat wildlife trafficking, to protect large landscapes and ecosystems, and to also eradicate illegal timber and mining products from the supply chain to protect indigenous people local communities from being exploited, for instance, from slave labor and forced labor. So that's what we do here at Grace Farms. And the reason I'm telling you that is because it's very closely related to the incredible work that's being done on a global scale for big cats that UNDP, our partners, UNDP and USAID, do on a regular basis. So let's talk about the Big Cat Dialogues. The title for the Big Cat Dialogues is Big Cats, Big Opportunities. Why is that? Why is that the title? I want to share with you the exciting work that is being done and why this whole dialogue has been inspired. So big cats are in much better shape now than they were 10 to 20 years ago. The snow leopard ecosystem project in the high altitude Himalayas of Asia, and the Global Tiger Forum slash initiative have been incredibly successful. And all of the incredible NGOs in the range states of these big cats have done an incredible job of stemming the loss of the numbers of tigers and snow leopards. And also they are doing incredible work, which is really what we're here to focus on, not only to stopping the loss of the great endangered species, but also empowering communities and protecting wildlife habitat. These incredible forests that oftentimes are, have been isolated. They are protecting forests. They are creating corridors, and they are actually giving a future for big cats, but also for people. It's the native people and the communities that exist around these natural areas where the big cats thrive. They're the people that USAID and UNDP are focusing on through sustainable development and through empowerment to give them a better livelihood, as well as save the big cats. So this is part of this very exciting holistic approach that UNDP and USAID have been pioneering for the last couple decades. Here's the deal. We cannot just save a big cat in a vacuum. It takes global coalitions, and it takes collaboration between non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations, public, private sector, and people who work in investing. It takes global financing. Not many people know that USAID and people like Mary Melnick from USAID Asia, they work hard to build coalitions and to provide funding throughout the world. Specifically, we're talking about big cat work in Asia and in the Americas with the jaguars. This funding is so imperative to work with local governments, communities, and NGOs that are on the ground. UNDP, the UN Development Program, they do incredible work of protecting forests worldwide, of doing sustainable development work. And the way they're doing this is by, they are working with GEF, the Global Environmental Forum, and the World Bank, for instance. This funding is imperative if we're going to attain our goals of sustainable development and protecting big cats. So it's this holistic approach that we will be focusing on today. We are going to have thought leaders from all over the world that will be speaking not only about the work from the partners that are co-hosting this event. We have the Big Cat Dialogues are co-hosted by not only UNDP and USAID, but also from the Global Tiger Forum, the Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Protection Program, and the Jaguar 2030 Forum / Jaguar 2030 Roadmap. These are the projects that UNDP and USAID work on together with the World Bank and the Global Environmental Facility to create major change, to save the most beautiful and magnificent animals on earth, our big cats, but also to empower people. Now, the other thing we're all dealing with and that we need to speak about is the major lessons we have learned from having this COVID pandemic that has swept our entire planet. We have got to take the lessons we have learned from the global pandemic and apply them to the work we're doing with sustainable development and with working to save wildlife and large landscapes through nature-based solutions, and as well as empowering local communities. How can we take the lessons learned from this global pandemic? Let's be honest, this pandemic was actually caused by going deep into the jungles, encroaching into native and wildlife habitat, going deep in there, and then bringing out those zoonotic diseases because of the bushmeat trade and because of the illegal wildlife trade. It is up to us to take these lessons, apply them, and then work with this big opportunities idea. That is the key to this conversation. We're not just talking about big cats and saving big cats and what we've done so far. We're talking about big opportunities. How can we make the global pandemic into an opportunity? How can we reset the way we deal with very exploitative industries? How can we cut back on our fossil fuels and work in make green economies for our local communities and the native indigenous people, as well as empowering women? This is the work that's being done. It's very exciting. And to open the remarks from and the welcoming remarks from USAID, I would like to welcome just one of the total thought leaders in this industry. First, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. You're all on Hopin. Hopin is an incredible format. So you can do a lot of networking and connecting through chat boxes, etc. For people that are speaking in Spanish, we're providing translation. In order to see the translation, please scroll below my image and my video on Hopin, and you can link up to the translation. One last piece where this is being recorded and it will be sent to you all after the event. So without further ado, let's begin with our welcoming remarks from USAID, from Javier Piedra. Javier serves as the acting assistant administrator of USAID's Bureau of Asia, where he oversees USAID's operations in 30 countries in Asia, which is, in 2018, he had a budget of over $1.3 billion that they work with these countries and with local actors to create positive change. Javier brings 35 years of private sector and public sector experience to USAID. He spent almost 20 years working in Asia in investment banking and has done funding with credit initiatives as well as World Bank Asia and the Trans Biodiversity Project. He is an avid birder and has worked with the Smithsonian in the private sector, and he is a huge champion for big cats and the environment. Everyone, please welcome Javier Piedra.
My name is Javier Piedra, and I am the Acting Assistant Administrator for Asia at the United States Agency for International Development. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's global dialogue on big cats and big opportunities, and to thank USAID's co-hosts, the United Nations Development Program, the Global Tiger Forum, the Global Snow Leopard Ecosystem Protection Program, and the Jaguar 2030 initiative. Big cats are at the top of the food chain, but they are also some of the most iconic representatives of nature. In order to save big cats, we must protect where they live, and by so doing, we protect a myriad of species, including the clouded leopard, rusty spotted cat, and other smaller species. This is good for the human person and society. There is huge value to the joy that animals bring us. A, when we watch them on TV, as people like Mark Fowler and his father Jim have brought us over decades. And B, if we have a chance to venture out into the natural world. Is it not true that we receive peace and calm when we experience the wonders of the wild kingdom? But at a more fundamental level, is it not true that care and stewardship of natural resources, a predicate to human exchange and interaction, goes to the core of who we are as individuals and societies? Even if we don't get to see a tiger, snow leopard, or jaguar in the wild, I think it's safe to say that all of us joining today care that we exist and that other wildlife exists, since we all represent, in our own unique ways, an unbroken chain of wonder. We are here today to come together to advance big ideas that we can, by working together, turn into big opportunities for the conservation of nature and for our own future. Is not life itself at the core of our joy? I would like to welcome and thank the speakers joining today's global dialogue. We have leaders in conservation, government, and business here today to kick off big ideas for conservation. But we don't want to stop at dialogue. We want to continue through to action. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are all even more cognizant of the link between animals and human well-being. In response to COVID-19, USAID is adapting our programs to overcome the challenges brought to life by the pandemic. We are expanding prevention of the zoonotic spillover through habitat conservation, and demand reduction campaigns to limit vectors of animal-borne diseases. Governments in big cat range countries have come together to work on initiatives to save tigers, leopards, and jaguars. They have written national conservation action plans, and USAID is pleased to have been part of the formation of the tiger and snow leopard initiatives in partnership with like-minded entities. USAID recognizes the long-term danger from overexploitation, understands the significance of biodiversity, prioritizes the importance of conservation, and works to counter illegal trade in wildlife. To safeguard natural resources and protect livelihoods, we partner with governments, civil society, and the private sector to strengthen systems and standards that conserve Asia's natural resources and biodiversity. Our work includes conserving critical habitats and landscapes, supporting sustainable supply chains, and combating the illegal trade in wildlife trade, timber, and fish. Allow me to quote from a well-known proponent of conservation. Many things have to change course, but it is we human beings above all who need to change. We lack an awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of a future to be shared with everyone. This basic awareness would enable the development of new convictions, attitudes, and forms of life. A great cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge stands before us, and it will demand that we set out on the long path of renewal. USAID is proud of our achievements to increase tiger numbers in South Asia by partnering with governments and civil society. Let me conclude by mentioning that water and its management are the source of life and living for all beings on this earth. We need to redouble our efforts in securing and protecting water from source to end user, and noting that many source areas are ruled by big cats. Thank you all for joining us today for this important discussion. On behalf of USAID, thank you for everything you do to safeguard the magnificent big cats of Asia.
Wow, thank you so much. That was very powerful remarks. I am very grateful to Javier for sharing all the incredible work that USAID is doing around the world. Not many people know, unless you're within the industry, not many people know the incredible work that USAID does. And on that note, we'll also go to welcoming remarks from our UNDP sponsor of these incredible events to highlight the incredible work UNDP is doing with Tim Scott and Eva Guria and the team from UNDP that helped put this together. We are going to have Adriana Dinu, Deputy Director of the Bureau for Policy and Program Support of UNDP. Adriana Dinu began the program November 1st, 2018. Prior to her appointment since 2013, she has served as Executive Coordinator for UNEP's Global Environmental Finance Unit, and she provided strategic work. She has provided strategic work and technical assistance for sustainable management of ecosystems and biodiversity, accessible across affordable energy, and has also addressed climate change adaptation and mitigation. She also works in sustainable water and ocean governance, and is a huge supporter of this work. So without further ado, I would very much like to welcome Adriana Dinu, Deputy Director of Bureau for Policy and Program Support at UNDP. Welcome, Adriana.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am delighted to be here today. And on behalf of UNDP, USAID, Global Snow Leopard Ecosystem Protection Program, Global Tiger Forum, and the Jaguar 2030 Committee, I would like to warmly welcome all speakers and participants to this global dialogue on big cats and big opportunities. We are so happy to be joined today by policymakers and practitioners from the public, private, and civil society sectors and international organizations. My good friend, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the Jeff CEO, Andrew Steer from WRI, and our friends and colleagues from UNEP, from CITES, CBD, CMS, World Bank, and other bilateral and multilateral partners with a heart in big cats conservation. I am often asked, why UNDP, the development agency of the UN, has such a large portfolio covering big cats conservation? For me, the answer is simple. Investing in conserving the landscapes of snow leopards, of tigers, of jaguars means investing in sustainable development. Their well-being signal healthy ecosystems. And we all know that healthy ecosystems underpin the Sustainable Development Goals. They support economic growth, they sustain billions of livelihoods, they provide the basis of food and water security, and they stabilize our climate. So today, Global Dialogue and Big Cat Dialogue series offers a unique platform to convene and strengthen partnerships and bring together voices and insights that otherwise do not have a chance to connect. Through today's discussion and our follow-up action on the ground, we have an opportunity to greater awareness and new momentum and investments around big cats landscapes and broader efforts to build forward better. The COVID-19 pandemic is a tipping point, and the choices we collectively make now could take the world in very different directions. So we do have an opportunity to invest in a decade of action that not only helps people recovering from COVID-19, but that resets the development path of people and planet towards a more fair, more resilient, and a green future. Thank you so much for all of you for everything that you do every single day in conserving biodiversity and conserving big cats. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana Dinu. That was a very beautiful message of the incredible work that UNDP is doing around the world with the Global Environmental Facility, GEF, and the World Bank. The work is literally groundbreaking, but it's also funding the incredible work on the ground of all of these big cat NGOs and the community-based organizations for the people that we're trying to better their lives as well as save the natural world. That leads us to a very sort of exciting and uplifting video that we have created called Big Cats Mean Big Cats Mean Big Opportunities. I would like to just give a little background. This is focusing on the opportunities that have been created for the future of empowering communities and protecting large natural areas through nature-based solutions, as well as protecting big cats. So please, without further ado, let's roll the video.
We have a big home, big lands, big forests, big mountains, big rivers, big flora, big fauna. And right now, our big world is facing some big challenges. Big issues that desperately need big ideas to overcome. It takes big thinkers with big vision to find big solutions, which is why you're all here. You're big thinkers. You know that a big way to save our big home is to conserve its big assets before they're gone. And you know that big cats are more than just beautiful. Big cats represent big assets that mean big opportunities. Big cats mean big biodiversity, which means big ecosystems, which means big security for life on our planet, which means big economic growth, big jobs, big schools, and big prosperous futures for big cats and big non-cats. So big thinkers, for the sake of our big planet, are you ready to start thinking, what's the word we're looking for? Yeah, that's the one.
This is the GEF doing such incredible funding work to save our natural world for the last couple decades. Lawyers, I believe am I having a sound issue? Okay, here we go. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, CEO and chairperson of the Global Environmental Facility. He is a lawyer by profession, politician by choice, and conservationist at heart. Manuel Rodriguez was elected as CEO and chairperson of the Global Environmental Facility by its governing body, the GEF, in June 2020. He is the former Costa Rican Environment and Energy Minister and was the pioneer in development of the Payment Ecosystem Services Initiative and strategies for forest restoration, ocean conservation, and decarbonization. As well as he is also an internationally recognized expert on environmental policy, multilateral environmental negotiations, and financing for nature conservation. During his 3-year term as Environmental Ministry of Costa Rica, he doubled the size of forests, made electric sector 100% clean renewable energy, and consolidated the national parks systems and positioned Central America as a prime ecotourism destination. So without further ado, let's please welcome Carlos Manuel Rodriguez from the Global Environment Facility.
Hello, I'm excited and honored to be addressing you today on a topic near and dear to my heart. Thank you to the organizers, USAID, UNDP, the panelists, and participants. I would like also to acknowledge the recent International Jaguar Day 2020, which is a fitting occasion for the Big Cat and Big Opportunities Dialogue Series. First, let me tell you a story. It happened in 2006, which was my first encounter with a jaguar deep in the forest of Corcovado National Park in Costa Rica. I was patrolling with an anti-poach unit of rangers, and as I was walking into one of the trails, a tapir with a baby attacked me and left me unconscious and injured in the forest. It took me 4 days to walk myself away out of that forest. And one of the days that I was walking out, as I was backtracking my footprints, my rubber boot footprints, I saw the track of the jaguar in top of my rubber boots. A chill went through my spine as I felt that the jaguar was somewhere there looking at me, even though I was unable to look at the jaguar. I didn't saw that jaguar. I moved away from where I thought the jaguar was, and I continued to walk quickly out of that area. And I thought that I was going to be eaten by the jaguar. The jaguar followed me for the whole day. I heard him. I smelled him a couple of times, and I knew he was very curious. Probably he had never seen a human. I wondered whether my remains will be found by rescuers. This experience definitely increased both my reverence and respect for big cats, in this case for jaguars. So I have been lucky enough to have seen this magnificent big cat many times since, and to continue to work to conserve these iconic creatures and the ecosystems on which they depend. I'm proud of the recent work that has been done together to save big cats, including the recent Jaguar 2030 New York statement that outlines key priority for range countries to focus on their conservation and sustainable development efforts and encourages regional collaboration. Progress since 2010, the St. Petersburg Summit, including the GEF significant contribution to cat conservation in Asia and Latin America. The GEF has supported more than $200 million in projects that has been contributing to the conservation of big cats in nearly 20 countries over the last decade, and we will continue supporting efforts in many other countries, as well as the current effort through the wildlife program that has built on protecting this key wildlife habitat, combating poaching and trafficking, and building wildlife-based economies. And finally, the recent inclusion of the jaguar in the appendices of the Convention on Migratory Species that marks a new stage in conservation efforts in my region. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture, but nevertheless, the current status and threats of big cats population in the wild are grim, with all 7 species of big cats listed in the threatened or near threatened species on the red list species, with the tiger being the most endangered one. This tells us that we should have done it not been enough, and we need to reinforce our commitment to work closer with governments. Well, at first glance, they shouldn't and wouldn't give critical competing priorities and status quo incentives driving the loss of nature. As a former Minister of Environment and Energy, every day I had to battle over limited financial resources for new legislation with other ministers who were fighting illiteracy, poverty, poor health care. And now the pandemic has only intensified this battle, but it doesn't have to. If we are to succeed, we have to sell the conservation of nature, not only in terms of what we're losing, but in terms of what we gain by having healthy, intact ecosystem, preferably in economic and social terms, such as wealth and job and protection from natural disasters. As we know, big cats are an indicator of the health of ecosystem. If we save these apex predators and their habitat, we have a better chance of saving ourselves. The conservation of big cats and their habitat is in our own best interest and will safeguard ecosystems, goods, and services, buffer us from the worst impact of climate change, and help us to adapt and reduce the risk of next zoonotic spillover and possibly the next big pandemic. Recent studies have shown the cost of needed action to prevent zoonotic spillover is in many ways an order of magnitude less than what this pandemic will ultimately cost us. So how can the conservation of big cats in their habitat fit into countries' effort to build back greener? Well, that's a great question. I think that this is the topic of this dialogue series, and it is the right question to ask ourselves. The same forces and unsustainable economic model that provide the origin of this catastrophic pandemic are pushing big cats to the brink. We will not be able to build back greener if we perpetuate the same wasteful economic model, the same stone pipe governance approach, and the same charity-based conservation sector. We must break down the institutional and government silos that perpetuate and support the current economic take make and waste model. Countries must integrate ministerial portfolios, improve and enhance national policies and legal framework, and support regional cooperation. This is especially important in the case of big cats that are known to traverse wide areas and cross national borders in search of prey and mate. We need to eliminate subsidies that are fueling the loss of nature and climate change, and strive for policy coherence across governments so the left and the right hands work together rather than as cross purposes. We also must fill the significant resource gap and change the profile of resources for conservation. There is a great potential to increase efficiency in national domestic resource mobilization. Countries need to understand that investing in nature is as much in their self-interest as spending on education and healthcare, and allocate domestic resources accordingly. National governments must make the management of their natural capital central to their policy framework, economic planning, and most important, public expenditures. The GF funding, around $1 billion per year, is tiny compared to the scale of what is needed. If we are to succeed, we must increase our resources and keep working with and leveraging other financiers, including those from the private sector. In addition, we must do all we can do to trigger national decisions that optimize the efficient investment of public expenditures. In conclusion, if we are able to protect our big cats and live in harmony with these populations in the incoming decades, this will mean we have been able to successfully halt illegal killing and trade of these magnificent creatures, and protect both the quality and extent of the ecosystems on which they depend, the same ecosystem on which we ultimately depend. In a year where we as a global community have lost so much, we have now a unique chance to come together to recover from this crisis, conserve our natural world, and hence ensure the well-being of our population and generations to come. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez. We are now coming up on our second framing remarks by Andrew Steer. Dr. Andrew Steer is the president and CEO of the World Resource Institute, a global research into action organization dedicated to promoting economic development while protecting the natural environment. Dr. Andrew Steer it works with 1,100 experts that work in 50 countries, from offices from Brazil, China, Colombia, Ethiopia, India, Mexico, the Netherlands, as well as Turkey and the United States. WRI focuses on 7 urgent global challenges: food, forests, water, energy, urbanization, climate change, and the ocean. Please welcome Andrew Steer, who is a major environmental spokesperson. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Mark, and good evening, good morning to everybody. Congratulations to USAID, UNDP, Global Tiger Forum, and the Jaguar and Snow Leopard initiatives. This is the perfect time to be having this meeting. The global pandemic, as previous speakers have already mentioned, is a massive wake-up call for all of us in the world. We really believed that we were safe, and we now know that we aren't safe. We really believed that actually we could keep on going the way we've been going, and we now know that we can't keep on going the way that we are going. We've also discovered that actually our relationship with nature is really broken, and we are entering a year in which we're going to make, as a global community, some pretty important decisions. And big cats, in many ways, are the iconic statement of the problem. They are held in awe often in a spiritual context. They're also held in fear. And Carlos Manuel made a very interesting point, didn't he, about the jaguars. All of us have been in areas where jaguars are there, where snow leopards, where tigers are there. Very, very few of us have actually seen them in the wild, but you know they're there. And actually having an appreciation of something that you know is there, but actually you can't see it, gives faith and can drive you on. And in many ways, our future is a bit like that. We can't see the future, but we know it's there, and we know that we have to protect it. Think about the current time. In the coming 2 years, the world will spend between 10 and $20 trillion to reboot the world economy. This could be an amazing gift. And every country in the world, even poor countries, will have some kind of stimulus to try and put people back to work, to try and grow their economy. Now, the last time we had a large sum of money, but it was nowhere near as large as this, was 10 years ago after the global financial crisis. And essentially, the world built back the old, unsustainable, environmentally destructive system that we had before. We lost the opportunity. If we do that again this time, we are in deep, deep trouble, because we will be investing in more concrete, in more growth, in more taking over wild spaces. Think about the last 100 years. The global footprint from humans economically has grown 20-fold. That means we are now 20 times heavier in terms of the world economy, pushing into wild places, extracting than we were 100 years ago. And if we keep growing at 3% a year as a world economy, as we may, we will grow another 20-fold. Think about that. So that's 20-fold in the last 100 years, another 20-fold. Multiply that, that's 400 times growth in the size of the human economy. All of that is basically extracting and pushing into those wild places. So we know we have to do it differently. We know we can do it differently. And we must use this time that we have now as we reflate our world economies to do it right. And we need to act differently. We need to get out of our silos. We need to think much bigger across institutional and disciplinary boundaries. At the World Resources Institute, our role to play is often in the field of monitoring. We run something called Global Forest Watch. Every single week, we can see down to 1/10 of a hectare forest that's being lost in the world. We then make that available to all of the big cat areas so that you can know exactly where encroachment is taking place, even if it's deep in the forest. And we're very happy that just a couple of weeks ago, we received a large $60 million grant from the Bezos Earth Fund to basically go to the next stage in a very radical way, where we will be able to use remote satellite technology, artificial intelligence, drone technology, and others, so that 3 years from now, we will be able to, at a 10 meter by 10 meter level of detail, on a permanent, ongoing, real-time basis, see how land use is changing. Not only trees that fall, but trees that regrow, crops that get changed, different cropping patterns. And we'll also be able to trace how much carbon is embedded in all of that natural vegetation. This potentially can be exceedingly valuable to those that are concerned about the protection and enhancement of big cats. That's just one example of how we need an interdisciplinary approach. So as we approach the year 2021, I believe that the community that we have online right now can play an exceedingly important role as we head towards the Biodiversity Summit. And as humans really for the first time are coming together and they're saying, look, it's not just about stopping doing bad things. It's not just about stopping destroying nature. It's about moving towards a nature positive approach. And I believe there is no community in the world that is better equipped to help on that. And I simply wanted to pledge on behalf of the World Resources Institute and all of our offices and all of our teams worldwide, all the possible help that we could give. And I'd like to pass on my greetings for this series that, that is beginning, and wish you the very best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Wow, what inspiring words from our friend Andrew Steer. I'm excited to start our first panel. The topic of our panel is human security issues, health, COVID-19, food, water, and livelihoods. Our moderator is Sherry Goodman. She is Senior Fellow at the Wilson Center for Environmental Change and Security Program and Senior Fellow at the Polar Institute. She is credited with educating a generation of US military and government officials about the nexus between climate change and national security, using her famous coinage, threat multiplier, to fundamentally reshape the national discourse on the topic. A former First Secretary, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense and Environmental Security, staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Goodman has founded and led and advised nearly a dozen research organizations on environmental and energy matters, national security, and public policy. Her voice is very important to this conversation, so I'd like to welcome Sherry Goodman to lead our panel. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you and so many others around the world this morning. Thank you all for joining us. And I think we've all been inspired by the remarks that have preceded, and we have a great and very diverse panel this morning, which I am excited to introduce. I would like to share with you, you might ask, okay, so why is a former defense official here leading this discussion on human security, food, water, natural security, as we might say? And I'll explain that by way of a story. 20 years ago, when I was serving as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, the top U.S. military official, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, invited me to lunch with his counterpart from Botswana. And I wonder now, why is he inviting me? I'm the chief environment official for the Department of Defense to this meeting. I don't usually go to meetings with chiefs of defense. And it was all about the mission in Botswana at the time for the military, which was to prevent wildlife trafficking and poaching, and being able to mobilize his forces to undertake this mission. And I realized right away that our natural security is so intimately connected in so many parts of the world with our national security. And that is sort of why we're here now, because as we've seen the world evolve, the ways in which humans have disrupted nature, the pandemic being the most recent, of course, example, we know that we need to get back to what we're calling a new national narrative, an international narrative on natural security, where planetary health is a central concern. And really, this big cat conservation dialogue this morning is really emblematic of making that so. And so that's why I'm excited, because over the last several decades in my time in service, I've seen the elevation of consideration for nature increase in a constructive way, but we still have a long way to go. There's so much more that we can do to elevate attention to this issue, to make wildlife crime a serious international criminal behavior in the ways that we treat drugs and arms, to improve sharing of information across a range of agencies. Andrew talked about ways in which WRI is doing that, but there are many ways in which governments also can share intelligence, and we can increase the capability of all of our organizations by working together and recognizing the food and water and human security connections across all of our ecosystems and livelihoods as they relate to a whole natural security narrative. That's why I am very excited to be here today. Now I want to turn to our panel and give them each an opportunity to share their perspective on this. I would just say, we've all, so many of us have watched The Tiger King with such horror, but we know that a crisis is too important to waste. And now we've seen just in the last day or two here in the US, some movement towards legislation to better protect big cats and ban the trade that has occurred in the United States. So even out of that expose and the horrors we saw in that, hopefully some good will come. And I know each of you now, our panelists, will share some of that. I'm going to start with Christian Walser of the Wildlife Conservation Society, who has great experience in this. And I'm going to also give my apologies here that I have to sign off at about 9:05, and Mark Fowler has graciously agreed to pick up from me. But Christian, are you ready to join on in? And I see a thumbs up, so over to you, please.
Good morning, dear colleagues and friends. Good morning from the Bronx. I hope you're all well and staying safe. On the backdrop of a relentlessly heating up planet, atmospheric carbon dioxide breaching the 400 parts per million barrier, and some 1 million species threatened to go extinct over the next decade, a novel coronavirus has catapulted across the ever-evolving interfaces between humans and wild places, relentlessly spreading coronavirus disease and bringing immense suffering and death to the outermost reaches of our planet. This dramatic global situation is caused by a virus that previously existed beyond the human-wildlife interface, and a disease that was unknown and still unnamed just a mere 10 months ago. Today, we and the planet, as the speakers before me have already pointed out, are clearly in distress. One thing that was immediately apparent was that the virus responsible for the outbreak originated at some point in time in wild animals. So a wildlife source is not at all a surprise, even though many seem to have been a surprise. The majority of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic in nature, and 2/3 of them have their origin in wildlife. Importantly, the spillover rate is increasing. Take, for example, Ebola virus disease, first discovered in 1976 in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the village near the Ebola River. Since its discovery nearly 45 years ago, there have been 11 outbreaks in the DRC. 4 of these outbreaks have occurred just in the last 3 years. And the last outbreak has just been overcome just a mere weeks ago. Beyond Ebola, it is estimated that there are some 700,000 yet undiscovered viruses with zoonotic potential. So as the world anxiously welcomes the COVID vaccine, we mustn't fool ourselves into complacency. A vaccine, while critically important from a public health perspective, is only a stopgap measure in the larger context of emerging zoonotic origin pathogens. Let us be absolutely clear. It's not about bat soups, pangolins, or specific viruses, but it's all about our interactions, exploitation, and destruction of nature. It is about these interfaces, these edges of destruction between humans, wildlife, and nature in general. So back in 2002 already, there was broad scientific consensus that long-term structural changes are necessary to prevent future epidemics. Unfortunately, as so often, we did not heed this advice. Basically, viral species switching and spillover events into humans are pretty simple. It all comes down to a numbers game. The more often we force conditions that increase direct contact between wildlife and humans across damaged ecosystems, the higher the likelihood of a spillover event. So a single logging road through a previously pristine forest is not just a road from A to B as the infrastructure may want to see it, but constitutes a novel linear contact area between wildlife, their pathogens, and humans. By the way, it works both ways. Our pathogens are also in contact with wildlife. That's something never to forget. This road invariably leads to larger urban centers, ending in multi-million people agglomerations, from which, with great ease and speed, any point in the globe can be reached within 24 hours. So, dear colleagues and friends, along with climate change and biodiversity loss, COVID-19 is just another symptom of ailing planetary health, and has starkly reminded us of this basic fact: human, animal, plant, and environmental health and well-being are all intrinsically connected. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres just summed it up a week ago here at Columbia University, the state of the planet is simply broken. And in order to limit the impacts of the next spillover event, we need a holistic One Health or planetary health approach across all policies and in all policies. And something like the Berlin Principles in One Health, which were developed under the guidance of the Wildlife Conservation Society and the German Federal Foreign Office. I want to reiterate this. The German Federal Foreign Office recognized how important health was for their security and conserving natural capital. And this was developed just a few weeks before the start of the present pandemic. So multilateralism with increased global collaboration and solidarity are the basis on which we're going to build a One Health approach. In order to be successful in addressing and preventing future pandemics, we're going to need transsectoral cooperation between governments, robustly founded multilateral institutions, and strengthened collaboration with conservation NGOs, because they are working on those spillover front lines. So as the pandemic continues to rage across the planet, we must urgently recognize and value the foundational importance of intact and resilient environments for our own health and well-being. As Carlos Manuel has already said, we need to be radical in true sense of the word and move beyond symptomatic therapy and boldly address the root cause of our ailing planet. We can no longer view nature protection and conservation as a competing interest to economic and social development. We need to stop right now discounting nature and irrevocably accept that nature is not and can never be considered cheap externality to our unrestrained production and consumption patterns. Moving forwards, these externalities with which we have burdened the environment need to be accounted for. Nature cannot be considered cheap moving forwards. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you. That was very inspiring, and thank you for sharing those views, Christian, and really moving us forward in this dialogue, which now brings us very logically to Sebastian from the European Commission, who is also going to share the views from the Commission about how we address these great challenges. Over to you, Sebastian. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry, and hi everyone, and many thanks to UNDP and USAID for this great opportunity to share a few thoughts on the links between Big Cat action and cooperation for development, as seen from the EU. After also listening with interest to the first dialogue that was held in September. I'm working on biodiversity and wildlife trafficking issues in the environment unit of the DG of the European Commission that works on international cooperation. We are going to become international partnerships very soon. So I don't have Carlos Manuel's ultimate jungle experience to share, or Andrew's dizzying vision of the unsustainable human footprint to partake. I'm not sure I have Chris's expertise on diseases turned pandemics of zoonotic origin, but clearly I fully share their points, and they're really part of this current European transformative agenda. I'd like to share some thoughts under the development angle to illustrate the connections that Sherry alluded to in her introduction, and basically how we can maybe try to unbreak the planet. So as some might have seen in most of our publications and communications, in order to achieve results at sufficient scale in terms of conservation, EU external cooperation puts a lot of emphasis on addressing ecosystem wildlife conservation, management, and restoration as fundamentally a development issue. We are clearly under increasing pressure to demonstrate the socio-economic relevance of wildlife action in order to be able to mobilize resources. And in a way, this makes sense as we seek a global deal for nature and people to live in harmony with nature, as the CBD puts it in its Vision 2050 agenda. And clearly, we need to identify and reduce those trade-offs between policy objectives. I'm thinking of jobs and growth, human rights, security, livelihoods. This inability to reduce the trade-offs is probably partly to blame for the failure of to reach Aichi targets, and I think we'll need to take stock of that. So the general context for us is the European Green Deal, which was adopted in November 2019, and the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, which was adopted in May as part of this Green Deal, and they are clearly helping to connect the dots between the various trends of sustainable development, including health in the post-COVID or the COVID context. I think discussions by heads of states in New York in September clearly confirmed the relevance of this integrated agenda to recover from COVID and reduce risks of future pandemics of zoonotic origin. So we have a series of publications that are readily available. They're called the Larger Than, on integrated conservation strategies that can be applied in different regions of the world, which try to connect the notion of species protection with more systemic actions. So for instance, the Larger Than tigers in Asia is focused on showing that we need to think beyond or larger than big cats on key landscapes for conservation. For instance, providing economic alternatives to poaching, favoring environmental education, developing wildlife tourism, sustainable version of it, and ecosystem services, so from healthy forests or watersheds. So the logic of the landscape approach and what we develop in Nature Africa, which is our new big initiative for Africa and our partnership with African countries, is to address the conservation and livelihoods nexus at the right territorial level. And as the wildlife-human conflicts show, if you think of, I don't know, lions in Namibia, leopards in Indian cities, it's not really a straightforward issue. So we really need to address this through a variety of angles. So maybe to close the loop and go back to big cats, where does the focus on big cats help us for development cooperation? I think it helps us in multiple ways. There are umbrella species. So there are co-benefits for other species and the surrounding biodiversity habitats. If you think of jaguars in Latin America, it's a case in point. And they're also predators that can be useful to fight a harmful species. And when we support carnivores under the SWIM project in Africa, for instance, or when we monitor snow tigers in Asia, it's not by chance. They're also iconic species, so it's a very useful communication tool. They appeal to donors and to the public. They are wildlife economy enablers, and they are good proxies and contributors to what I would call maybe the brand power of biodiversity and nature. But also they're part of cultural heritage and values. So the spiritual value of jaguars in Latin America, or lions or tigers, this link with indigenous cultures, also this valuation of natural habitats, this is something that they bring. And ultimately, I think, and that was pointed out by Carlos Manuel earlier, they're a kind of barometer. When you have big cats that are thriving, it's clearly a good measure of your success in conservation policies. I'd like to make a parallel with non-cats, but the mountain gorillas in Rwanda. When you see the increase in population of mountain gorillas in Rwanda, you know there's a lot of good things going on. So also they can be a clear sign of reduction of wildlife-human conflicts and breaking the vicious loop between poverty, insecurity, and natural capital depletion. So at the end of the day, big cats are useful, but we must also think bigger or larger than big cats. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. That really was just very, very insightful. And it's really good to know how forward-leaning the European Commission is and how personally involved and dedicated you are with your work. And now we're going to go halfway around the world to Bhutan. And thank you, Dr. Norbu, for being available to us. I know probably many of us here hope that we will have an opportunity to visit your happy country and see how well you're doing in big cat and other conservation efforts at some point in our lives. So it's probably, if it's daytime here where I am, it must be nighttime where you are. So thank you for being available to us in the off hours. And I'm going to turn the screen over to you and also say my farewells to this group, as I must depart for another event on the Arctic. So I'm going from you up to the Arctic now. So thank you, Dr. Norbu, and thank you all.
Thank you, Sherry. Such a great privilege to be able to address you all. Good morning. I think in my case, it'll be good evening. Hello from Bhutan. I hope all of you are keeping well amidst the pandemic. As we all know, I think the current crisis related to the virus has exposed many structural and systemic flaws and weaknesses, particularly in our economies, supply chains, and social structures at all levels, I think, both at the national, local, as well as the international level. But particularly for countries like Bhutan, the lessons have been particularly painful and pertinent, I think, because we are landlocked and we depend a lot on imports. So it has really showcased so much of our weakness. I think it has shown that Bhutanese were always aware that we need to diversify our economic base, but I think this crisis has really brought that into sharp focus. And as you will all know, our tourism sector has been the hardest hit. And when tourism is hit, many other industries like hotels, sale and trade of agriculture produce, livelihoods also get seriously impacted. But I must say that Bhutan has also been fairly fortunate because given a certain degree of isolation and also limited points into the country, so we have been fairly safe. But I think what needs to be noted, and perhaps the greatest blessing and asset for us, has been our leadership, exemplified by, of course, our kings who are leading at the front lines with courage, compassion, and decisive interventions. I think because of that, I think COVID has been so far contained in Bhutan. And because of the crisis, I think it's been an opportune time for many of us around the world, and particularly also in Bhutan, to rally for support, which can bring about immediate impact and benefits. And I think support from institutions like the USAID, the UNDP, and particularly the Small Grants Program in our case, which puts resources in the hands of those who can utilize it in the most efficient manner, and those who need it the most have had the greatest impact, and it continues to benefit people's lives. I don't want to make this like a applause for Bhutan, but I think everybody here knows that Bhutan has played a leadership role in conservation and environmental protection for many decades now. And this has led Bhutan today, I'm told it's only one of the 2 carbon negative countries. And I think some institutions like even the World Bank are looking at Bhutan to say that development and well-being are possible, even being carbon neutral, or in some cases carbon negative. We still have 70% of our land under forest cover, and this allows a whole host of species to thrive. And I believe that today in the Himalayas, if you look at the entire Himalayas, given the forest cover that Bhutan has, we may be the last biodiversity refuge here. If you look at the middle forest belts in Nepal, almost all that is gone. So in case there comes a time in the next century where we have to reforest Nepal, probably they'll have to come to Bhutan to get seeds and genes. So these forests, which spread all the way from the Indian subtropics all the way to the greater Himalayas, but when it comes to cats, it affords protection for almost 10 species of cats in Bhutan. That's almost 30% of all the wild cat species in the world. So it's available here in Bhutan. We have about 100 snow leopards and over 100 tigers, accounting for almost 3% of all the tigers in the wild at the moment. But given Bhutan's size, I think that's incredible, because if you compare the size, relative size to the proportion of tiger habitats, I think Bhutan is a significant source for tigers in the world. I think the presence, the health, and the flourishing of these big cats, I think particularly speaks to the empathy of the Bhutanese people, the health of the wildlife habitats, and I think the general development ideology and cultural values and belief systems of our country. Life in Bhutan in particular, and the outlook to life, are still shaped very much by Buddhist beliefs, local myths, legends, and stories, which advocate for, I think most importantly, mindful consumption. I think consumption has to be really taken into consideration, whether we talk about carbon or whether we talk about species. Balance, and I think our beliefs also speak a lot about containment of greed. I just want to share a story. Whenever we talk about climate change, I happen to be working for the government, and we went to COP15 in Denmark, and there was a lot of hope that some kind of climate agreement will be met, but Copenhagen didn't happen. So what I realized in Copenhagen was, in the West, even the toilets are heated. But in much of the rest of the world, we cannot even afford to heat our bedrooms. So I think there are many things which we need to look at when we discuss conservation, when we discuss livelihoods, when we discuss justice. So I think the values are very important. And these values have not only influenced individual lives, but as a country, it has influenced our policies and our overarching aspirations. For instance, our constitution mandates every citizen to be a champion of the environment, and by that token, I think the champion of climate. And environment is, of course, not the only thing. I think the Bhutanese leaders, in their wisdom, have also organized and singled out in the conception of the so-called gross national happiness, 3 other key elements, which we need to be mindful of if we are talking about development, prosperity, and so on and so forth. One is cultural vibrancy, balance to socio-economic development, and so very importantly, good governance. So there again, justice, transparency, so on and so forth. And all these mix, I think, has led to big cats continuing to thrive in a country like Bhutan. Testament to our leadership, far-sighted policies, and I want to also bring this here. I think it's the general sacrifice of the Bhutanese people that we have foregone, not cutting down our forests. Right now, today, if you look at the Bhutanese media, there are calls from many different sectors from varying quarters in Bhutan that we need to cut down more of Bhutan's forests so that our economy can grow. We are yet to accept these calls, I think. And of course, as environmentalists, we will say, oh, no, we should not cut down forests. But we must also understand that these are well-meaning calls, driven by desperate needs to increase Bhutan's income base, create jobs, as we have many of our previous speakers have referred to, established a robust economy. And today we hear these in many different languages, I think, shapes and forms, such as green recovery, post-COVID growth, energy systems transformation, sustainable consumption, and most importantly, circular economy, so on and so forth. So we hear a lot of these things, but we all acknowledge that there is the ever-present and continuing challenge of creating and sustaining meaningful jobs. Across much of Africa and Asia, most of our populations are still rural. In Bhutan, even today, almost 60% of Bhutanese people still rely on agriculture, and almost 16% of our GDP is agriculture-driven. So in the midst of all this, again, we also know that the challenge and the opportunity is to ensure that people continue to benefit, ecology continues to benefit from the large landscapes where these big cats thrive. I think just to be a little positive, I think doing that is possible. Our experience in Bhutan and across much of the big cat tiger-rich countries attest to that possibility and promise. Particularly here, our field experience so far shows that well-designed programs with the right support, with the right mechanisms, and with the right institutions, being able to successfully conserve big cats can bring about significant benefits for livelihoods, climate mitigation, and improvement of food, water, and energy security. Importantly, I think Bhutan, as you know, is sandwiched between 2 big countries, China to the north and India to the south. I think these big cats can also serve as species to promote peace, to promote cross-border cooperation. Tigerscapes, as I like to call them, or large landscapes for tigers, I think we could call them jaguarscapes for jaguars, can serve as, I think, significant carbon sinks, allow for enterprise and job creation. And importantly, these landscapes will conserve a lot of water, I think. One such landscape which we are particularly interested in from here in Bhutan is a landscape which stretches from Bhutan, connecting to northwards to Arunachal Pradesh, going eastwards, I think, touching the southeastern reaches of China and all the way to Myanmar, covering almost 170,000 square kilometers. I think that could be a tigerscape which needs a little bit more attention, I think, in terms of looking at tiger conservation in the 21st century. That could be a landscape which could bring us a lot of benefits. So to end, I think there are so many opportunities which await us. I think the imperative now will be to channel and accelerate financing and know how to support agile, forward-looking organizations and governments to ensure that these big cats can be conserved into perpetuity. I think I don't need to mention all this. We need to build trust. We need to support ambitious targets, overcome inertia, and all move forward. I think everybody understands this. But I remain hopeful that nature will be conserved and valued, and propose that as it's happening now, that big cats serve as our doyen, as our champions, and as our bellwether. After all, whenever we talk about nature, because of technology and all our Samsung phones and all that, I think, but I think human beings in particular have to be reminded again and again that we still cannot defy gravity. We still have to stand on the earth, breathe the air, and drink the water which flows on planet Earth. And I think our ability to allow big cats to thrive will be a measure of the greatness of our species. And as long as they remain, drawing on again from Hindu and Buddhist kind of belief, in our landscapes, we build a lot of temples. And we build temples all across the place because we want to consecrate that space. We want to create magic. I think in the wild, as long as we have species like the tigers, we have species like the jaguars, we have species like the clouded leopards or the snow leopards, I think those landscapes are consecrated. They are powerful landscapes. If we as a species, if we are not if we are not successful in keeping those animals to thrive, I think we have taken away some magic. So in conclusion, I think as long as these big cats remain, I think our landscapes will still remain sacred and magical. I think their persistence is our prosperity. I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We very much appreciate your words and your wisdom, Nwang. Thank you so much. I am very happy to introduce our discussant. We've got Radhima Solanki calling in from she's a wildlife biologist with and GIS expert with the Global Tiger Forum. Radhima, please, we are excited to hear your questions, and you are going to start a discussion in response to our speakers. Please come to us from the Global Tiger Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar. I represent Global Tiger Forum, and we are an intergovernmental organization which works towards the capacity building as well as transboundary dialogues, negotiations between different tiger range countries for the larger purpose of tiger conservation. So as my previous speakers have already said, that a very important aspect is the land use policies. If you look into, if I can speak from Indian perspective, the tiger densities as well as presence is not equally distributed, but it is like spread out throughout the nation, the various parts of India. And at the same time, the distribution of natural resources as well as people density is not equally distributed. Some places it is quite rich. And so this is the reason that when we talk about tiger conservation, we can't limit it to the a big cat conservation. We can't limit it to a certain protected area. We have to go for a larger landscape. We have to talk about identify various stakeholders in these landscapes. And since the distribution of large carnivore as well as natural resources, developmental and various livelihood options are way different for these different landscape, policies and a uniform policy from the nation perspective won't work. It should be from a very site specific. We have to identify the stakeholders, include the local people as well as policy makers, the ministers from those areas, and bring out a more holistic conservation plans, and which includes actually the land use policies also. Like already Bhutan, if we talk about Bhutan, definitely Bhutan has corridors. They have identified corridors. They have given a legal status. But there are a lot of such places, a lot of such countries where the big cat is present in different landscape. But the corridors, the connectivities are crossing across various developmental activities, various people, for various stakeholders in these kind of landscape. So I think a more robust conservation policy, land use policy is very much required. Like recently, we had tigers in most part of India, and now we are identifying tiger using the higher altitude of the Himalayas, the high altitude of Himalayas. So these kind of places, these kind of landscape which are crossing borders from various nations, involving various states within a nation, a more holistic approach for conservation is required, and involves better land use policies is a primary aspect for it. So I think that is something that our organization also works towards, building the bridge between the policymakers as well as the conservation and ecology of large carnivore. So I think that is something should be involved for most of the large carnivore conservation, and this is something that everyone should look into, the primary aspect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radhima. That was very insightful. Now we've heard from, it's nice to have heard from India, from Nepal, we've heard from the European Union and from WCS. So we have a question from the audience, and I'd love to ask each one of our panelists to give a short answer, including you, Radhima. But we would like to keep them from 2 to 3 sentences as a max for our answers, just for timing. But the question is, let's focus on a larger view of a question. So, to ensure big cats and nature are considered while building back from COVID and general transformational change, economic, health development, etc., what novel partners outside the traditional conservation sphere should we engage with? So please, panelists, go ahead. We can start with our first panelist, Dr. Chris Walser.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark, for that question, and to the audience as well. So what's really important is that we work not only multidisciplinary, as we've talked about health in the past, but really and truly transsectoral. So infrastructure, transport, all these sectors need to be involved in all decisions. And that's why I was saying One Health in all policies and across all sectors.
Thank you. Sebastian?
I think one way of putting this, and it's really an important question, would be to reverse a little bit the way we consider mainstreaming, which is what we're trying to do at the moment with the EU biodiversity strategy. That is to say, it's got to be clear to everyone what is at stake, and hence the responsibility of everyone to contribute, and not DG Environment or the Environment Unit or the Ministry of Environment's responsibility to go there like a cop and judge people. So going to those actors, especially in the economic sector, they have to feel what they're responsible for, and to reflect those externalities for nature.
Thank you. Nguyen?
I agree with the previous speaker. I think right now, most of the time we want to engage communities and other agencies where they're directly staying or impacted by tigers. I think we need to get big businesses and other players in and make them care equally.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so now we are off to our next discussion panel. I want to thank Radhima, I want to thank Nguyen, Sebastian, and Chris. That was very informative. And now we are starting a second panel. This one is going to focus more on investing in and how do we invest in nature and business and in these communities. So our panel number 2 is called Catalyze, pun intended, the smart money for nature and business. And our moderator is Andrew Mitchell. He is the founder and senior advisor for the Global Canopy. He is an international thought leader on national and capital finance in the tropical forests and the founder of Equilibrium Futures. I'd like to welcome Andrew Mitchell for this panel. Thank you. here he is. Okay, there. I'm back here. We will wait for Andrew to come back on. But I also wanted to ask, our panelists for a quick response. How do you see the investing and how we can empower these communities as a way of helping this problem and creating positive change? Chris and Sebastian, would you like to add to this?
I can just add to it quickly, and I've seen some of the listeners, some of the audience had also commented on this. Definitely one of the things we need to work on is some kind of direct payment. We cannot always have payments dependent on tourism, which will go up and down. We see this pandemic now. We need to find more robust systems to support the communities on these front lines in the big cat habitats and on the conservation front lines. So some new reflections on that are urgently needed at this point in time.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, now we're back up and running. We are now going to go to a video from Voices in the Field. We've heard from Bhutan and India, and we're going to hear a few more voices from the field, and then we will be going to Andrew Mitchell. So thank you.
Greetings from Dushanbe, Tajikistan. My name is Kurbun Alamshoyev, and I am holding PhD in History and Ethnography, a writer and journalist, and head of the community association Pamir Mountains, based in the Pamirs, studying the secrets of life, cultural and spiritual values of the snow leopard. I discovered one truth for myself. Everyone wants to see this rare and mysterious and beautiful creature everyone falls in love with, and at the same time they want to kill it. I'm glad that in Tajikistan the snow leopard considered a holy animal, and its killing is a big sin. This is not only natural, but our cultural, aesthetic and economic wealth. Together, only together we can save their lives.
I am Ipra Mekola from Dibang Valley and from Mishmik community, Dibang Valley, Arunachal Pradesh, that is in India. So in our community, we believe that tiger is our brother. So tiger also have a same status in our society, whatever our tribe have. And so for that we'll have to work and very strong support to the tiger. So conservation is very much essential in today's life.
Hi, my name is Seraira from Cambodia. I am a Mekong conservation hero and a co-founder of YA Catalyst. Tiger is an umbrella species, which means protecting tiger are protecting all species and the forest that can combat climate change. Reintroduce and conserving tiger will make a huge impact in conservation in Cambodia.
नमस्कार, म डोमा पौडेल रत्ननगर 6 चितवनमा बस्छु। म कम्युनिटी बेस्ड एन्टी पोचिङ युनिटको संयोजक र पेसाले नेचर गाइड। बाघ जंगलको अत्यन्त सुन्दर, आकर्षक र लजालु ठुलो शिकारी जन्तु हो। जहाँ बाघ बस्छ त्यहाँको पारिस्थितिक प्रणाली र वरपरको पर्यावरण अत्यन्त स्वस्थ र दिगो प्रणालीको सूचक मानिन्छ। यिनै बाघ र वन्यजन्तुहरू भएकै कारण हाम्रो पर्यटन र जीविकोपार्जन चलेको छ। बाघ हाम्रो पहिचान हो, हाम्रो प्राण हो। त्यसैले हामी सबै मिलेर बाघको संरक्षण गरौँ। जय संरक्षण। धन्यवाद।
我叫任清都杰，我来自原上草自然保护中心。我现在在果勒镇马青县安尼马青神山附近的雪豹检测点。雪豹对我来说就是很可爱的极简物种，因为它的生态价值和生态功能都很好。我们原上草在安尼马青神山区雪豹检测也是首次发现这块区域的雪豹。
Hi, this is Suraj, President of Nova Nature Welfare Society. This is an NGO working in the field of wildlife conservation in the state of Chhattisgarh. For us, big cats are responsible for ecosystem services provided by the forests, as well as their existence in a region is important for economic benefits of the people.
Hi, I'm Howard Quigley, Director of the Jaguar Program at Panthera. I think what big cats mean to me is best embodied in one situation, Alan Rabinowitz and I were on the Jaguar journey in Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula. We were speaking with one of the leaders of a Maya community there, and he said that losing the Jaguar is like losing your house. If you lose the Jaguar, your whole house falls apart. I think that's the embodiment of what big cats mean to me.
Should I, now, can you hear me okay, Gary? Mark?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those kind remarks, and hello and welcome to everyone from around the world. This panel is going to be talking about money and nature. We're talking about not only big cats, but also fat cats, people with the money, and how do we get that money to work in the landscapes where we want to protect and preserve these beautiful animals. And the problem is there's too much money going around that's doing the wrong thing. It's a lot of money that flows into these landscapes, which is nature negative. And the challenge the world faces is to make that money nature positive. So we're going to be having a look at some of the possible mechanisms and new things people are thinking about in this panel. The big problems are, of course, the funding that's flowing into things like agriculture, infrastructure, problems of illegal trade in wildlife, lack of budgets to protect areas where the cats live. Overall, I guess we're probably losing the battle for nature, but I think the tide may be turning. And I'll tell you why. I've been at this 40 years, from the days when I used to walk around in pristine rainforests in various different parts of the world. And when I used to talk to people who were fat cats in those days, they were not interested in what I was talking about. The world environment had barely been invented. Sustainability was a concept nobody understood. But today things are different. The penny has dropped on climate change. And more recently, just in the last 18 months or so, the idea of nature-related risk, the collapse of nature causing a problem for our entire economic system, has suddenly started to gain a tremendous amount of traction. The realization that we're degrading nature across these landscapes is a real problem for our economies has started to gain traction both politically, but also crucially in financial circles. And I think the best example of that is COVID-19, which has ravaged the world and created so much terrible impacts on human beings, but it's also affected our economies everywhere, with approximately $12.5 trillion now being deployed by governments to prop up economies because of the crisis, the pandemic. And what's interesting is that this is a speck of nature, something we can't even see, that has caused this. And there's a lot of evidence emerging that it's due to zoonotic transfer of the virus from wild animals to humans, but it's not the animals that are the problem. The problem is the way we treat nature and the degradation of landscapes caused by money often doing the wrong thing, which incentivizes people to do the wrong thing. So it's not easy to redirect money. There are trade-offs. Companies need to make profits or they won't give us the products we want. And governments need to raise taxes in order to do hospitals, roads, and harbors, all sorts of things. But so we're going to have a little chat about how we can change the movement of money and how we can make it work, not just for fat cats, but for big cats as well. And we've got a great panel with us. We've got Gary Littman here, who's Vice President of Global Initiatives at the US Chamber of Commerce. We've got Sarah Marston, who's Senior Technical Specialist and Solution Architect at Microsoft. And we've got Dr. Helen Crowley, who's Head of Sustainable Sourcing at an Innovation. at Caring Group, though she's actually on a sabbatical right now, and she'll tell us more about that. So I'm going to come to Gary first. Gary, you're in charge of the Chamber's policy and advocacy related to economic reform and the G20 and G7 and big international financial institutions. You've also announced recently an international policy coalition for sustainable growth. What's your perspective on this, of how we can change the movement of money for it to have a lighter touch on nature? You'll need to unmute yourself, I think, Gary.
Andrew, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be part of this panel. And the subject matter is extremely important. You're correct that right now systemic risks associated with environment are very clear for the business community. And we're the US Chamber of Commerce. We represent companies, and we try to figure out what companies can do better, and importantly, what governments can do better, and how can they work together. So in terms of sustainability and addressing big issues, we would be the organization that would support more funding, let's say for USAID or UNDP or GEF, for the programs that are helping the big cats today and many other sustainability issues. But the question you're correct to pose, how to make sure that the business community can do its best to support the environmental systems and do it on scale, which is very difficult. And that's why we got involved in larger conversations with G20 and G7, the World Bank and IMF. The point is how to make sure that sustainability is profitable, because otherwise it will be very difficult for governments to enforce sustainability. And the issue is going to play out differently in different situations. Big cats, for us, first and foremost, and we've heard it today, is sort of a proxy for how healthy the ecosystem is, and a large ecosystem. So how do you make sure that that measurement, that assessment, that indicator of the ecosystem health actually is helpful to companies to make managerial decisions in terms of the use of the resources? How do you drive investment? Or importantly, how do you stay away and let conservation take its pace? So all of those issues are a matter of public policy. And that's why we are getting business community involved in talking to governments and trying to figure out in different situations what could be done better. And in some cases, that's a matter of creating a market for a particular environmental service. In other cases, it may be killing the market for the products that are detrimental to the livelihood of different species. And we can provide substitute products or educate consumers. There are lots of things that we can do if the private sector can talk to the government, to the public authorities constantly and with a lot of trust in each other.
Well, let me turn to Sarah to hear your perspective, Sarah. You are a senior technical specialist and solution architect at Microsoft, and you've been spearheading some very interesting new work on with your Big Cat Digital project and Project 15. Everybody knows Microsoft. Half the world seems to use it. How does a huge digital corporation like this help what we're trying to do with looking after these cats in these environments?
Yes, thank you. As you said, I'm a solution architect over at Microsoft. So Microsoft, all up, has an incredible commitment to sustainability in 4 separate pillars that they're focused on in water, waste, carbon and energy, and ecosystems. And, that's really one part, and I agree with what Gary's saying, and I think Andrew, is going to be a theme of how private businesses can really get involved in pushing these initiatives forward. In my little world that I sit in, my little corner, I actually come from a non-traditional origin story of how I got involved with conservation, in that I had invented a safe schools and workplaces platform a couple of years ago. And, there it was. I talked about safe retail, safe factories, safe everything. But then I learned about poaching and realized quickly that we had already built a platform that was just another use case, and how much was out there in the commercial space that we could help scientific projects move forward. If only we could meet the scientific developers and learn their use cases. And so, what you're talking about in terms of a bigger motion versus, smaller, where you just get a bunch of very concerned technologists that have skills. And really, we just want to meet those scientific use cases to help. And about 6 months ago, I started, this tiny little team a year ago, but 6 months ago we expanded, and we partnered with the GEF Small Grants Program, which is implemented by the UNDP. And what's interesting is that they were talking to us about, how do you get this to scale? Because I can meet with an NGO and I can bring commercial processes with my teammates. How do you make a business model out of conservation? How do you make a sustainable solution that can financially sustain itself? But how do you do that for thousands and thousands and thousands of NGOs? So what we decided was that we would create what we call an open platform called Project 15 Open Platform, which is out on GitHub. And if you don't know what that is, that's open source coding, which means it's free software out in the world. And that opens up the community of developers to be able to contribute, for any scientific developer to take it. And because we're handling the plumbing, if you will, anytime you have a camera trap or a sensor or a collar, and then you're going to send data up to the cloud and you're going to do something with it, whether it's research or tell somebody that, a cat has entered an area it's not supposed to be in and we need to intervene. That whole plumbing of a solution we created and just put out there for anyone to take and use, because that business model is so different for conservation-based solutions. It's not going to, right now you're not going to have an IPO and you're not going to have VC funding necessarily. You're going to have a granting model. And we wanted to alleviate some of those dev costs to get these solutions landed and out there in the world. And then, of course, Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud, has all sorts of services that you can stitch together to make really, really robust solutions for a community.
Look, Sarah, thank you. Yeah, well, so that's a way to connect developers to the cats and reduce costs at the same time, so we can get software being developed much more quickly. And that's important too, is reducing costs for conservation, because that's a huge struggle for people. Helen, Dr. Helen Crowley, let's turn to you and get your perspective now.
Hi, Andrew.
And Helen, I know you are sort of technically head of sustainable sourcing from Caring Group, and you'll tell us what Caring is, because not everybody will know, and also about what you're up to on your sabbatical. So over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I always thought I would end up being a big cat biologist. I'm a wildlife biologist by training, and all I imagined that I would do would end up somewhere in Africa studying cats. But then I digressed a little and fell in love with lemurs and ended up in Madagascar. So my background is actually conservation and development projects for many years, but the last 10 years I've been in corporate sustainability and working for Caring, which is the group that owns Gucci, Saint Laurent, Balenciaga. So it owns 14 luxury brands. And they've been they have been leaders in corporate sustainability over the last 10 years and have really, one of the reasons for that is they've had a really deep understanding through their environment profit and loss accounting methodology of what's going on in their supply chains. And what that shows is how great supply chains are at externalizing environmental and often social impacts and just focusing. Supply chains are very good at certain things, but they're not good at looking after the environment, which is one of the reasons we're in this situation. So one of the nature crisis and the climate crisis combined. So over the last couple of years, I'll echo what you said, Andrew, there's been a really interesting shift to an understanding more broadly across the corporate sector, not just in the fashion or luxury sector, of the relevance of nature. Because everyone knew about nature and they're intrigued by it, but how relevant was it to my business? Like, what am I going to do about it? But that relevance, often framed in risk, is becoming very, very clear. So now that companies are focusing more on, okay, this is important for me, they start exploring their supply chains and understanding, well, where am I having impact? Where is there risk? So we're at a very interesting moment. There's still a lot to do where we can actually make big cats, snow leopards, and I'll get back to snow leopards and cashmere in a little while, but we can make big cats and the other environment and nature, importance of nature, relevant to business. And it's not just risk anymore. It's about risk, but the flip side of risk is opportunity. It's about creating a new narrative about what companies can do for nature, to restore, to protect nature. And it's not corporate philanthropy, it's a business play. And the way you have to do that is by understanding supply chains and understanding the interface of your business with nature and figuring out what you do there. And we can talk more maybe in the next round about how do you put in place wildlife-friendly practices in agricultural landscapes, particularly, which, let's face it, are frontier landscapes where animals come out of protected areas or they use agricultural landscapes as corridors between different areas. So they're very important areas to focus on. Protected areas are also, but so are agricultural landscapes. They're important areas, particularly for big cats, but for many wildlife. So how do we focus on those production landscapes, work with the producers, drive from the corporate vision of nature's important, there's a risk to us, there's an opportunity to reconfigure our supply chains and to create a nature positive narrative in what we do, in the way we do business. What do we do at those landscapes, and how do we put in place wildlife friendly practices? And I can go into that in some more. And there are so many great opportunities out there. So that's a lot of what I've been working on, thinking through how do you integrate nature better into corporate decision making and supply chain structuring, so that you can head towards being nature positive. That's what I've been doing in my sabbatical for the last year.
Excellent, Helen. Well, thank you. And we've had three perspectives there. One from the Chamber of Commerce in America, at grand scale, looking at across all the financial system, and then a huge global digital supplier, Microsoft, from Sarah, and then finally from another perspective from a global conglomerate in luxury goods, but looking at the supply chain issue. So we're going to get a perspective on this from Kustubha Sharma, who has spent 18 years in conservation. And Kustubha, you're working with snow leopards, the Snow Leopard Trust in Seattle, USA, but based in, you told me earlier, in Kyrgyzstan at the moment. You're looking at this wonderful snow leopard across landscapes. What are your feelings about what you just heard? Give us some perspectives.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. And I must say that what a powerful and diverse set of remarks those were. To be honest, hearing those thoughts come from the business community shows promise for a healthier, kinder, and just planet. I'll take ourselves back to the broader issue once, and then we can come back to the discussion. But whether it's the bushfires, catastrophic cyclones, extreme temperatures, the ongoing pandemic, it's climate change and biodiversity that are devastating our economies and health today. Now, economic development and ecological conservation have sadly been at loggerheads, thanks to the prevalent model of economic development. This high production, low value, market driven, as Helen just mentioned, model has triggered what we can easily call as a planetary environmental crisis and a mass extinction of species. So each of the big cats, be it the tiger, jaguar, or the snow leopard, is more like a thermometer of the health of an entire ecosystem that provides provisional and regulatory services worth nothing less than billions of dollars. Now, it is no surprise that cultures and religions across their distribution range have revered the big cats as a custodian of the entire ecosystems for years, in fact, for centuries. So among big cats, snow leopards present a unique opportunity in representing what can still be considered as relatively connected and pristine habitat. even though most of it is outside the boundaries of conventional protected areas. Unfortunately, that situation is changing rapidly, and the once pristine habitat is facing a variety of threats, including, of course, climate change, but mining and poorly planned infrastructure, and now even disease risks. So the snow leopard does offer an unprecedented potential for climate smart and inclusive economic development that looks at conservation and well-being of ecosystems and biodiversity as essential entities. And believe it or not, a typical snow leopard conservation program addresses anywhere between 10 to 13 of the 17 development goals, not to mention how it corresponds to the Paris climate adaptation strategies and Aichi biodiversity targets. So coming back to the point, what we really need today is economic development that is not just market driven, but also grounded by cultural values and ecological security. A balance between these three elements can also become its unique selling proposition, as businesses would call it. But if anything, then this ongoing situation with COVID-19 has shown us that our disregard of nature through illegal wildlife trade or habitat destruction can lead to not just widespread economic crisis, but also loss of life. So on that note, I'd like to open this discussion for with let me say, a desperate call to the panelists of this incredibly valuable dialogue to join Big Cats Conservation, for they have a lot more than just money to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you. And it is a desperate call because the collapse of nature has, in my lifetime, has been astonishing. Areas that I used to walk through that were pristine are now bomb sites. The numbers are devastating. Report after report coming out on the big numbers. And yet, the World Economic Forum recently produced a report that said almost half of the globe, in fact, more than half of the global economy, about $44 trillion, was dependent directly or indirectly on the services from nature. So, Gary, you know, you're listening to companies talking to governments, you said to me the other day. Is that conversation going on amongst your membership about cutting off the branch on which they're economically sitting?
Well, absolutely. Companies are doing a lot of work assessing the risks to their business models, and so do shareholders. But the question is, how do you do it at scale and within the time frame that makes sense in the real world and in nature? You know, the humans, social humans, have been pushing big cats out of the environment for thousands of years, way before there were companies. It's a matter of competition for natural resources that goes back to prehistoric times. What can we do now and what would make sense? I've been listening to the conversation so far and trying to think, what can governments do with private sector help? For example, does it have to be the army that fights illegal hunters? Or can it be turned into more of a private sector, you know, rewarded cooperation? We have bounty hunters. Why not turn the private interest against those who are doing things illegally? So using private sector to limit stuff that's done illegally and using private sector to support things that need to be done legally. That's sort of systemic thinking. If you reflect on what Costa was saying, you know, the danger to the environment from you know, urban sprawl, maybe it's a matter of rethinking how we conceive of the cities. We've been thinking that cities are the enemies of environment. But if that is so, that cities should be surrounded by vast developed land. Maybe big cities are the answer that concentrates population and allows more land for conservation efforts. What I'm suggesting is that the dialogue needs to be at very systemic level. Each company is trying to do its best, but companies cannot individually solve large global or even regional environmental issues, especially once they face competition from those who don't do that. And remember that you've referred to business frequently as fat cats, and there are some. But a lot of businesses that are most destructive of the environment are very lean cats, very small businesses who barely survive on the margins between, urban centers and pristine nature, if there is any left. How do you make sure that their business models are not destructive of the environment? If you think of the data that's been collected, it's wonderful that we have that data and the companies are offering that data for nothing, or almost nothing, public authorities as well. Who is the user of that data? How do you make that data commercially interesting so that companies and public authorities use that to actually inform decision-making? Is a pension fund going to take, data about the health of the number of tigers into their accounting, or are they going to be looking at some, number crunchers who produce reams of other data rather than looking at this one indicator? How do you make that useful? That's the conversation one have.
Data is incredibly important here, and having worked with the financial sector for many years, I mean, if you look inside a Bloomberg terminal, of which a huge majority of Western financial transactions are made using these terminals, there's actually very little data in there on natural capital. It's all about financial capital. And I know this because I put one of the first tools inside a Bloomberg terminal on water for gold and copper mining. And it's getting this data on environmental externalities, if you will, included, even if because at the moment it's invisible. So how do we get this data on nature more visible in economic transactions? And let me just ask you to touch on another distortion in the market. I'll give you one statistic, that the amount of money going into subsidies which are harmful to nature is 5 times greater than all the money governments are putting in that are trying to be positive for nature. So even if we doubled all the money that governments were putting in, it would still not meet just the subsidies that are harmful for nature. How do we turn that situation around?
It's very important to understand what we mean by subsidies. It takes bread to a farmer as a subsidy. That's part of the numbers that you are quoting. How do you make, and that was introduced for a reason. Subsidies are not something that people come up with. It's frequently a matter of legislative democratic process. Subsidies are offered by governments in response to some need. And different points of political development, what we think as very important investment then becomes, an ill-conceived subsidies. And that's why there needs to be a reassessment of what's a good subsidy and what's its purposes. If subsidies right now go to supply funding for millions of small businesses, that's subsidies. That will hurt nature. We need recovery very fast after the pandemic. But a year from now, it will show up in national statistics as very, very bad subsidies for the environment. So the nature of the conversation is different. What are the real problems? The problem is not the subsidy. Subsidies are a matter of competition and support. The problem is, how do we conceive of natural problems and direct public and private decision-making and funding to solving that? We can come up with it.
I'm going to jump across to Helen, because we were talking about supply chains earlier, and one of the often stated problems in agricultural supply chains, and they produce products like leather that go into luxury goods and other matters. These are causing tremendous market distortions which are bad for nature. Now, how does Kering, a huge conglomerate, and maybe in discussions at the World Economic Forum, are you seeing this topic coming up, or does everybody want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's, One Planet Business for Biodiversity that came out of the G7, as well as the Fashion Pact. These coalitions of companies are wrestling with this issue of regenerative agriculture, of how to transition in their supply chains, actually beyond their own operations, but how to support a transition to a more restorative, regenerative approach. And I would add wildlife-friendly approach, to be very specific, that you capture protection and support and stewardship of wildlife in these agricultural landscapes. There is a lot of really good thinking around how to do this. But it comes back to, one, being aware. Companies themselves have to be aware of their supply chains, their impacts, their risk, and where to prioritize action around nature And it comes together with climate, obviously. If you protect nature, you get climate solutions as well. And how to do that in this sort of regenerative, restorative way. And secondly, how to incentivize that. So once you know that you've got to focus on Kashmir and Mongolia because of the land degradation issues and the threats to wildlife, not only snow leopards, but other wildlife, or you decide you are going to focus on beef leather production systems where you want to build, support regenerative agriculture that respects jaguars and other wildlife in those landscapes. So once you've identified that that is an important thing to do, then, and science-based targets for nature, there are frameworks now. There's information, data, and frameworks that can help companies identify where their priorities are. Then you have to basically work in the field, and we know how to do that. We've spent years working with producers to incentivize, to support, whether they're local communities, whether they're farmers, whether they're sheep ranchers, or whether they're herdsmen, Mongolian Kashmir herdsmen, working with them to support them on better practices. And one of the ways our role as companies, particularly in the fashion sector and caring, is to be responsible off-takers and to support this transition and support through our supply chains and through our purchasing practices to support better practices on the ground and reward those better practices and show that it's important to us.
You're one of the good ones. You're one of the good guys, you're saying, and I know that you probably are. Not you personally.
The pathway is there.
Caring has done a great job, and we wish many other companies would take it that seriously. But what do you think about the role of regulation here in cleaning up supply chains? The UK government is consulting currently on a law, a new deforestation law that will make it illegal to import into the United Kingdom goods that have been grown or produced on illegally deforested land. How is a big company going to be able to know that, whether it is or it isn't? How can it respond to that kind of law?
Well, I think carrots and sticks are always important in everything. Regulation always plays an important role. So do incentives, so does opportunities and highlighting opportunities for companies. I think you just need to and regulation creates a level playing field. So I think there's a lot around that. How do companies do that? So many people say, oh, but it's so complicated, supply chains, they're globally diffuse. I don't know where my stuff comes from. I get that, but somewhere someone knows. And there are so many tools and advances out there now in mapping and tracing in supply chains. And if you as a company don't know where your stuff comes from, there's plenty of people out there that are figuring out how to figure that out with third-party data. Trace from the Stockholm Environment Institute is one example of the methodologies that are out there to track commodities and flows of raw materials. So the traceability bit is really getting solved rapidly. So it's really a responsibility for companies to say, okay, I've got to understand my footprint, and whether the regulation's telling you that, or whether it's a voluntary requirement because you want to be a better global citizen, or you want to meet your science-based targets for nature and climate, you can figure out where your stuff comes from or where it shouldn't come from. And that just needs to be a priority. There's no silver bullet. You just got to do the work to figure that out and then make the choices on the priorities. The good news is there are a lot of, like you talked about at the beginning, Andrew, there's a lot of interest and willingness to do this in the corporate sector, not only because of the risk side of things to their business, but also the opportunities it creates for them to build more resilience, to create a new value proposition. Plus, the investment community is starting to get on board, as you know well. And that's a big driver as well. Like, oh, okay, we've got to figure this out. Let's start figuring it out and make a difference.
Indeed, there is a new task force on nature-related financial disclosure, which Helen and I are both involved in. We'd like to get Microsoft involved in that, and lots of other companies in the US. So we'll talk about that on another occasion. And there was a task force of climate that's been quite effective in getting people on board, and governments are making it mandatory to do that. And it's speeding action up on climate. It will speed things up, and so will the task force for nature. And that's what digital companies do, Sarah, doesn't it? You speed things up. That's what the whole digital revolution has done. So, what can Microsoft do here? I mean, I was quite excited by Ant Forest. which was set up by Alibaba, a Chinese company. I talked to you about it just earlier. And this is a game you can play on your phone, and it's got 500 million people playing this game. And it started by planting more than 100 million trees across 112 hectares in northwest China, a staggering thing. And it reduced 7.9 million tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. These are big things involving millions of people. You're reducing the costs of software development, but with a mighty corporation like Microsoft. Is there a way you can help mobilize people for nature as well?
So I think so. It's many levels, and technology is, of course, the kind of the backbone of everything we're talking about, whether it's data, getting open data sources, processing data, doing research, or you're doing something with sensors. I could talk for hours on this. I like to say, a smart city is a sustainable city, and at the base of a smart city is sensor data coming in. You've got to process that, etc. I want to touch on something that Gary had said about supporting how the private sector could support some of the efforts of government-led. I think you made a comment about the army coming in to, find when there's, the animal trafficking as an example. That when I start to think about, the initiative of Project 15 and rethinking our use cases, that's where you start to get into how hard would it be for a partner who's developing on Microsoft technologies to add sensors into, say, a shipping container that can find, that kind of material that it's looking for. I don't know how feasible that is, but when you start to think about people who are building solutions within an industry, if you become aware of the problems that can happen. So, maybe it's AI models looking at the X-rays of, the airports of baggage and looking for illegal materials and different biological materials or something. Adding these little bits and pieces into pre-existing solutions could actually make a bigger impact overall. And that's something I'm really focused on personally.
Well, thank you. We're running short of time now, and I do want Kostova to have a final remark. We've got a few questions coming in. Jay Shohan says, have you found specific partners that are more open to wildlife-friendly practices? And Isabel Kezia has said, how do we get businesses and financiers engaged in our dialogue today to take the time to hear our discussion? So, Kostova, could you just, as a final reflection, think about that? This takes time to work all this stuff out. And how are you finding you're getting the time, that people are giving you time to listen to you or your stories and what you think needs to be done?
So I think this is where all the other speakers and whatever they spoke comes in, because, for example, what Microsoft did last year with their AI campaign, Microsoft for AI campaign, introducing and showcasing a snow leopard. A snow leopard became a lot more than just a unicorn, which may or may not exist in a remote mountain. Few people, a handful of people ever see it. But I think the real takeaway from here, which I think gets further cemented seeing this conversation here, is there is a lot more that industry can offer beyond just resources, just money. It's almost, if you're focusing everything only on making money available, you're undermining the value and the role that industries can play. There's a lot more, and we've seen Sarah's presentation, we've heard from Helen, and how Gary has explained. I think there's a lot more for us to be able to engage at many more levels. We need to engage with industries, because once you understand stuff better, that's when you start realizing the values as well. And I mean, why countries and industries have started, or globally economies have started to look at climate change as a big issue. It has a relationship there. So I think I personally feel that it'll be of huge value to explore the relationship beyond just money and expand it to other levels.
Christopher, thank you. I'm afraid we are out of time now, and I wanted to thank you for the audience for listening, taking time to listen to us. We've heard three very interesting perspectives from three very large institutions, and we've also heard from Christopher giving us his reflections on what that means. We're all on a path to try and make what he calls a healthier, kinder, and more just planet that's good for us and good for GATS. And with that, I thank all the panelists so much for their remarks and the wonderful work that they're doing to try and make this happen. And I'm going to hand over now to Mark Fowler of the Grace Farms Foundation for his closing remarks.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting and informative panel. I'm totally grateful to have heard that. I will tell you, hearing about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Microsoft, as well as these incredible partnerships that are developing. This is what this Big Cat dialogue and global dialogue is all about. It's about innovative, holistic, new partnerships and new collaborations. Hearing about the supply chain work that's being done to literally make it illegal to have products that have been from deforestation, where there's been deforestation or illegal logging. That's the kind of work we're doing as well at Grace Farms Foundation. To eradicate forced labor, because the indigenous people are at risk of being exploited when they're out in these deep remote jungles. This is the kind of work that is holistic. Save the big cat, empower people, and clean up the supply chains. Bring in the public, private, and the for-profit world. That is the exciting work that's happening from here on out, and that's why we have big opportunities. So we're working hard to save the big cats. Thank you to all the partners and all the NGOs that are doing the best work throughout Asia and the Americas, with the 2030 Jaguar Dialogue coming up on Thursday. You'll be hearing about all the incredible work of the roadmap for conservation to save the jaguar and create green economies in the Americas. So this is very exciting work. Join us at 10 a.m. For our next event, the 2030 Dialogue on Jaguars. And thank you to Mary Melnick and to Tim Scott from UNDP, as well to all of the speakers and participants. It was very inspiring, and we look forward to seeing you next time. This is about creating new actions and creating positive change, and you all can be spokespeople for big cats and spokespeople for big opportunities. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.